Hi, everyone. Welcome to The World This Week, another confined edition. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. The Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
I'm good, but it's hot here in Paris.
There is a heat wave on, so I'm told. This is, by the way, the first time since March the 13th where we have all Paris-based panelists. We love the fact that that's perhaps a bellwether of better things to come. Maybe we'll all be able to meet each other in person in the studio very soon. Not yet, though. I want to say hello as well to Vivian Walt of Time Magazine. How are things on the left bank?
Pretty good. Hot as a furnace.
Hot as a furnace. Gosh. We have with us in our company from the French news agency AFP, journalist and producer Michele Barbero. You can cope with the heat, right, Michele, right?
Yeah, more or less. I'm actually baking as well, like everybody else in Paris.
You're baking as well. Well, we also in the company of France 24 senior correspondent Catherine Norris-Trent. Oh, sorry, or should I say award-winning journalist Catherine Norris-Trent. Catherine, congratulations on winning the One World Media Award for that harrowing documentary that you filmed with the refugees in Libya.
Thank you very much, François.
We'll be talking about Libya a little bit later in the show. Let's begin, though, in Texas. Texas, where the governor has just announced that he's hitting the pause button. Those are his terms when it comes to the easing of lockdown. This, as each day brings a record number of new cases. Greg Abbott, the governor, saying the last thing we want as a state is to go backwards and close down businesses, he says. This temporary pause will help our state corral the spread until we can safely enter the next phase of opening our state for business. Your reaction, Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think that the states that opened up very quickly or tried to pretend that the coronavirus, the COVID-19 epidemic was just going to be in the Northeast, it was a New York problem or a California problem. I think those states are now suffering a lot, and Texas is just one example. I think 29 states out of 50 have seen a spike in cases over the last few days, and that's not a good sign. It probably certainly indicates the disease is spreading. Whether the death toll will go up in connection with that spread is another question. But it doesn't look good. It certainly doesn't look good.
You know, Chris, 1 week ago, we were talking about the fact that there's a bit of a culture war, isn't there, surrounding social distancing. We were talking about the fact that you wear your politics on your face, whether or not you have a face mask. Do you feel as though with Texas hitting the pause that perhaps the tide is turning in the U.S.?
No, I don't think so. I think that the culture war runs very deeply and is deeply ingrained in the United States at this point. When you've got the President of the United States essentially refusing to wear a mask, and you've got people around him dissing anyone who does wear a mask, then you have a situation where you're basically encouraging people to make a statement. Either they're wearing a mask and they're against Trump, or they're not wearing one and they're for Trump. Suddenly it ceases to be about the disease itself, which is crazy in a country where 122,000 people have died from this disease. But then American politics are pretty crazy these days.
Vivian Walt, we saw there was a false start when Donald Trump had his first public rally. This was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, unable to fill a 19,000-seat arena. He had a second rally this week in Phoenix, Arizona at a mega church. There it was a smaller room, 3,000 people, and he did fill it this time. And as Christopher says, he sure wasn't wearing a mask on stage.
You know, it's baffling, especially since we're sitting in Paris, where people have really been pretty serious about the lockdown, to see the President of the United States, the most powerful country in the world, essentially blowing off the coronavirus. But I'm not sure I totally agree with Chris that nothing has shifted. I think that slowly there is a kind of awakening, even in red states, true loyalists to President Trump, that they are up against something that the president does not have a handle on. and that it's kind of getting away with that with them, and that they could be facing something that might rise above partisan politics. Even if they're going to still vote for the president in November, I think that there is perhaps a redoing of the calculations, and I think that the Texas governor's move was a really quite a significant one.
Catherine Norris-Trent, when we talk about culture wars in this instance, we can look at the leaders at the top, right? At Donald Trump or Boris Johnson, who's been criticized for being late to order the lockdown in the UK. But is it really about the man at the top in this instance? When you look at the spike in heat you had in the UK the last couple of days, where Bournemouth essentially became the new Fort Lauderdale or Jacksonville, people on Thursday flocking to the beach in England.
Yeah, absolutely incredible pictures, really, and they're just really jam-packed. I mean, you have to take into account that in the UK, whenever the temperature goes above 25 degrees Celsius, people go slightly crazy and think they're not going to survive if they don't get to the coast. So there was a huge swarm of people. In fact, the local MP there said he thought that on Thursday there were 500,000 people in that county of Dorset, visitors, and that's actually more than the residents of that area. So, I mean, it was a massive impact. I mean, you've got to look at different things with the UK. I think a lot of people very disillusioned with the mixed messages that we've seen coming from Boris Johnson and the British government.
But this is not Boris Johnson's fault, is it, if people all decide to huddle at the beach?
Well, I think people are fed up. They're fed up because the UK has been on lockdown of some form since the 23rd of March. I mean, there's still a 2-meter rule in place. So it's eased slightly, the lockdown in the UK, but it's still, still there are lots of people working from home. There are lots of kids not going to school. They haven't eased it up as much as they have in France. Then you've had mixed messages. So you had that huge scandal about Dominic Cummings, and you had a lot of criticism of the British government not handling this well, locking down too late, not giving the right advice, bunking their anti-COVID app, being hypocritical. And I think that has watered down the government's message. And then you've got the things that we've seen, huge protests. We've seen a lot of illegal overnight raves. People have seen others coming out onto the streets, and now it's hot. It's over 25 degrees, and they're like, I'm going to go to the beach. So I think there is a part in which it is the government's responsibility because they have blundered the messaging and they have blundered the handling of it. And that has, really dented the credibility of their message.
So two things in what you just heard from Catherine Norris-Trent, Michele Barbero. One is the consistency of the messaging from leaders. And the second is citizens who are getting a little stir crazy. I know it's summertime in your native Italy right now. How's it looking there?
Right now, I mean, I think people in Italy are taking this crisis quite seriously. Of course, like everybody else, in the world, as soon as you can't expect them too much unless you're in Sweden to abide by just some general guidelines. You need some rules being enforced, and as long as rules were being enforced about the lockdown, people were actually abiding by them. Right now, of course, people are trying to enjoy as much as possible the summertime, but I think Italy was the first European country or Western country rather to be really struck hard by COVID, and it's left a massive scar. I mean, there's going to be a big ceremony in Bergamo, which was one of the epicenters this Sunday. People are not forgetting. That's for sure.
And do you agree with Vivian Walt when she says here in Paris, people have been fairly good about taking social distancing seriously?
I think all in all, yes, even though some people were good, some people were not that good. I think one of we've been talking about mixed messages from the top, and I think this was a problem.
People began the week being scandalized, Michele, about how many people were hanging out by the canals, young people, when it was World Music Day on the 21st last Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I do have a feeling that when it comes to forgetting the situation we were in just a few weeks ago, I think in France, they're not doing so good. I think the French people kind of forgot quite fast how everybody used to live up until a month ago, especially knowing that, health experts are saying, things are improving, but the virus is absolutely still around. And that like music festival was actually something I didn't understand. I didn't understand how it was possible, even for authorities to give the green light to this festival, to be honest.
Yeah, a lot of other issues that have been coming up since here in France. Schools restarted. Catherine Norris-Trent knows all about that. And in some cases, it was stopped after 2 days because already there were new clusters. And over in the US, there's COVID-19. There's still a presidential race on. One of those who's been among the most ardent supporters of the US president is the governor of Florida in this crisis, Ron DeSantis, who says the spike in new cases is in part due to testing.
Particularly with some of the younger folks. I mean, what we're seeing in Florida is really rapid transmission in that 18 to 34 age group. And you're seeing a lot of cases come up. And granted, they weren't being tested at this level a couple months ago, but I also think they're testing positive at a higher and higher rate. So clearly, you have a lot of spread there.
So there you hear it, Christopher. There is a nod to the fact he does recognize that COVID-19 is real. You saw the people on stage around him all wearing their masks. Your publication, The Daily Beast, though, saying that Ron DeSantis himself could be in a bit of trouble. His popularity has plummeted, says the Daily Beast.
Yeah, well, it's a hot mess in Florida. It's a state that's full of retirees, full of old people. So if you have a situation where lots of young people are going to the beach and spreading the virus around and they're asymptomatic, he's right. The testing is showing these people are infected. The symptoms are not showing that they're infected. What does that mean? It means that they spread the disease even farther and faster than they would if they were actually sick. And who are they going to spread it to? A lot of them live with their parents. Some of them may live with their grandparents. The death toll from this is going to be very, very high, according to many analysts. And DeSantis knows that. If you have a state that depends on older voters, and he depended on older voters, not younger ones, to win his election, and those people start dying in very large numbers because of your incredibly stupid policies, then that's going to exact a political price.
Vivian Walt, while this is happening, it is already impacting election races in the United States. We saw there were primaries this past Tuesday in New York and Kentucky, most notably, and they're still counting ballots because, well, they have all these absentee ballots they didn't have before, this number of them, and we're not going to have final results till next week.
The most worrying thing is not these primaries, it's the presidential election, where they will also have a lot of absentee ballots, and it's highly likely that there will not be a winner called on the day of the election, as there always is, other than, that famous year of Gore versus Bush. But I think that there are a number of things happening, and as Chris says, your chances as a politician in the US right now rise and fall with this virus. And battling your policies on the virus, as the president has somewhat inexplicably, and has many of his followers, like Governor DeSantis has, is going to hurt them terribly in November. And you're already seeing the effects of that through the primaries, through the polling, about the presidential election. Those who have stood very firm on the virus have seen their poll numbers rise. And those, like President Trump, who have simply botched the whole thing, have been punished by even their supporters.
So, Vivian, when Donald Trump this week, for instance, announces there are going to be visa bans till the end of the year for students, au pairs, and certain skilled workers, is that a winning idea for him?
It seems a little desperate. The numbers are not that big. There are certain key industries, in particular the tech industry, that heavily relies on so-called professional visas, the H-1B visa. As a matter of fact, I myself emigrated to the US on an H-1B visa. It's the visa that's given to a lot of, skilled professional university graduates. It has, and he's correct on this, it has been open to abuse. There have been probably thousands of tech workers who have moved to the US on H-1B visas to work for the tech industries at far lower salary rates than they would that would be paid to US workers. And that is an issue that the president has taken on, and probably correctly. It's a temporary ban. It's
but does it win in votes?
His hardcore supporters, and it seems desperate to me. It seems the kind of desperate measure like going to the border and promising to build the border wall again.
All right, detractors of the U.S. president point to another strategy he may employ. And we talked a minute ago about all these absentee ballots, and that is voter suppression. In 2016, there were documented cases of that, most notably over social media. In some instances, the finger was pointed at Russia. Christopher Dickey, there was a book review in the Daily Beast this week where the author was interviewed, and he said, people are already wondering, will I be able to vote securely? Will I be able to do it safely? Will I be able to vote without jeopardizing my health? And the Russians thrive on taking advantage of pre-existing doubts and divisions.
Well, of course they do, and that's exactly the kind of thing that the Russians are going to exploit. They're in fact exploiting it already. They sow these ideas that it's dangerous to vote or that voting is unreliable. Probably the basic strategy will be in line with some of the kinds of things that President Trump has been saying, that you actually can't trust those absentee ballots, you can't trust the electoral machines, you can't have faith in the elections at all. That is the big message the Russians would like to get across. Because
is that the Russians or is it Trump?
Is there a difference? When it comes to this kind of thing, it's symbiotic. Seriously? It goes back and forth like a ping pong ball.
What, you're saying they're in cahoots?
Do they consult? Do the Russians call him up? Does he call them up? I doubt it. But is their messaging extremely similar? Yeah, of course it is. What the Russians have been doing is not only do they generate their own propaganda, their own disinformation, they can mine the vast field of disinformation that's generated by different parties within the United States of America, and then amplify that. Amplification is what they're all about. It's also what Trump is all about. He takes messages that suit him, and it suits him now, especially if he thinks he's going to lose, to try and discredit the electoral process as such. And that's what the Russians would like to do, and that's very probably what he would like to do, especially if he thinks he's going to lose. And that's a very dangerous thing. And you combine that with COVID-19 and with the question of absentee ballots taking a long time to count, and you suddenly have an environment where those results that we're used to getting the night of the election, often within minutes of the polls closing, aren't going to come out. And we'll have a period of real uncertainty. And I think, especially if Trump feels that he's not winning, he will do everything he can to exacerbate that sense of uncertainty, and so will the Russians, either creating their own messaging or just amplifying his or that of his supporters. I think these are going to be very parlous times for American democracy.
All right, results perhaps deferred on the first Tuesday in November in the U.S. A parade was deferred back in May in Moscow. Russia's marking the 75th anniversary of victory over the Nazis. Donald Trump had originally been invited to the parade before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Well, this week that parade was staged. Vladimir Putin taking to the rostrum, effectively saying it's thanks to Russia that the war was won.
Отстояв свою землю, продолжали сражаться, освободили от захватчиков государства Европы, положили конец страшной трагедии Холокоста, спасли от нацизма, от его смертоносной идеологии народ Германии. и невозможно даже представить, что стало бы с миром, не стань на его защиту Красная Армия.
Michele Barbero, most historians agree Russia paid a very heavy price during World War II, 20 million dead, and they were key in beating the Nazis. Your reaction, though, when you look at that parade?
I have to say it was like baffling images because you saw, 90-year-old veterans just packing the stands alongside Putin with no masks, as if social distancing had never been invented. And at the same time, it was a show of force, right? A show of military might, and it was clearly Putin trying to do what he does best, as in giving the Russian people a feel-good moment in which they can essentially forget about the fact that the economy is in deep trouble and the revenues are tanking. And he probably pulled it off because of course Russians are voting in a referendum these very days. And I think Putin really saw this as an opportunity to give the Russian people this feel-good moment when he can still pretend, or at least he can again pretend, that the COVID outbreak is roughly managed, even though it's not really the case in Russia right now. And at the same time, trying to make the Russian people feel good before the economic impact of this health crisis really takes a toll.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that referendum in a moment, but in the build-up to this parade, Vladimir Putin penning a 9,000-word article that was published in an American conservative publication, The National Interest, on June the 18th. In that publication, he goes further than what he had said at the beginning of his presidency, that the pact under which Germany and the Soviet Union each took a chunk of Poland was reprehensible. Now he's no longer saying that. In fact, he's blaming what's called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact on the West. The Soviet Union did its utmost to use every chance of creating an anti-Hitler coalition, despite the double dealing on the part of the Western countries, he writes. Catherine Norris Trent, Vladimir Putin, with a view of history now that says not only that, but that Russia annexed the Baltic nations with on a contractual basis with the consent of elected authorities there?
Yeah, I mean, the article, the claims are pretty extraordinary. I mean, he's remodeling history to suit his narrative and to gain. A lot of this is to play domestically as well to the population, this kind of nationalism that's being stirred up ever more in Russia. Going back to the Victory Day parade, I was actually there in 2019, and it's a really incredible thing because it started out, there's thousands and thousands of people marching through Moscow and big Russian cities carrying photos of their ancestors who fought in World War II. And it's very emotive, really a huge wave of emotion comes through. People crying through the streets, patriotic music, patriotic dancing. And it kind of started off as more or less a grassroots thing at some stage. But over the last decade or so, Vladimir Putin has captured this to, again, fit this nationalistic, pro-Russia dialogue, this narrative that he's stirring up and using this patriotism to paint Russia as this huge, great nation of huge international importance. And that's one of the ways he can stay powerful and stay on top of things in Russia.
Yeah, whether he can parlay that popularity of the moment or the rally round the flag moment into votes, because as Michele Barbero was saying a short while ago, you have a July 1st referendum that would effectively allow Putin to stay in office till the year 2036. And he has taken up something that we see more and more of in the United States, that is early voting. The early voting, which began this week. In fact, to encourage people, our reporter Gulliver Cragg spoke with a representative of the Chamber of Commerce, which are giving out these lottery tickets for gift vouchers from stores if you go and vote.
Выносится на голосование по одобрению, но вы можете не одобрить. Все, кто придут, как бы они ни проголосовали, они будут участвовать вот в возможности получить эти купоны.
Vivian Walt, what do you make of gift vouchers to get people to vote in this referendum?
Kind of makes you wonder if President Trump might, take up the idea. I mean, Chris spoke about a symbiotic relationship, and I think what's as interesting about what Putin has to say about about World War II is where he chose to say it, in an American conservative publication. So he clearly sees this as a very tight connection of two leaders essentially rewriting history. And in the process, I think the whole notion of effectively getting re-elected, that's what this referendum is about. It's about installing him in power for another decade. So it's clearly very difficult to miss the parallels with the US at the moment.
Chris Radicki, does Vladimir Putin still got it?
I think he's got it less and less. I think that's one of the reasons that he has to stage these kinds of events more and more. There's a whole problem in the Putin regime, which is rather like the Trump regime, in the sense that people can't give him bad news. So when there was a huge chemical spill in the north of Russia, there was no official statement about it for days, so that they could organize an event where suddenly Putin could appear to be in charge and asking tough questions. This is the kind of thing that goes on with a weak administration, not a strong administration. And I think that all the referendum, which certainly will allow him to stay in office until he's well into his 80s, so effectively president for life, and this Victory Day parade, all that is bread and circuses and manipulation of the system by a man who, in fact, I think is less and less popular in Russia.
Russia, which is a player in the next story we're going to talk about, and that is Libya. The French president, and as full disclosure, we are taping this show before a conference call between Emmanuel Macron and his Russian counterpart. Libya sure to be part of the discussion. He had some strong words, the French president, in the company of his Tunisian counterpart at the start of the week, directed not at Russia, but at Turkey.
J'ai déjà eu l'occasion de le dire très clairement au président Erdogan. Je considère aujourd'hui que la Turquie joue en Libye un jeu dangereux.
Yes, since Recep Tayyip Erdogan sided with the internationally recognized government in Tripoli, the offensive of forces from the east, led by the nationalist Khalifa Haftar, have been suddenly on the back foot. They had been at the gates of the capital for months. Now they're retreating to Sirte and perhaps points further east. And that has the Turks answering the French in kind.
In Libya, we are supporting the legitimate government, and the French government is supporting an illegitimate warlord and jeopardizing, as I said, NATO's security, Mediterranean security, North African security, Libya's political stability. And I'm giving all this. They still blame us. They still criticize us.
Catherine Norris-Trent, what's going on between France and Turkey right now?
Well, this hugely complex situation in Libya, which is effectively a proxy war and has been for some time between several different states, several different axes, by the way, has really exposed the differences between France and Turkey, and things are getting extremely hostile, even more so than in recent months, basically on several axes. First of all, against the two different sides of the Libyan conflict, which the French government is widely seen to have given at least behind-the-scenes support to Haftar, who they are backing because basically back in 2015, 2014, when Khalifa Haftar started in eastern Libya, said he was trying to eradicate some of the radical Islamist groups there. I think France thought that was probably a good idea. And then also they want stability on Libya's southern border, because France is one of the countries doing a lot of work fighting jihadists in the Sahel, and Libya's open southern border means that, that's just a huge gateway there, making instability more. So a lot of people see them as having given behind the scenes support, at least to Haftar. Turkey's come down on the side of his opponent, the internationally recognised government, the Government of National Accord, although it's extremely weak, and they're basically got a group of different militias from the northwest of Libya fighting for them. Haftar has been pushed back in end of May, beginning of June, outside of Tripoli. Now they're in Sirte, so that's the new dividing line, and these tensions are becoming ever clearer between France and Turkey. And you saw that in the Eastern Mediterranean recently, when France accused the Turkish warship of behaving very aggressively, of locking its radars onto the French warship. These are two NATO allies, which are very, very thinly disguised war of words there, and you just wonder where it's going to go, and I doesn't seem any way really to calm this down.
Were you surprised to hear Emmanuel Macron call out Recep Tayyip Erdogan in such a blunt manner?
It's getting blunter and blunter. I mean, France has criticised Turkey for quite some time. But whenever he does so, whenever Macron makes these remarks, he's just open instantly to the kind of comeback we've just seen, with people accusing France of gross hypocrisy, saying that you're supporting a warlord, you're supporting the other side. Now, Paris would never admit that it is doing that. You kind of wonder. I think France is casting around now for the next strategy, because Haftar has been pushed back, and the situation in Libya is so tense and so crucial to Europe in so many ways. There's these huge flows of migrants coming from the shores of Libya towards Europe. There's the Libyan oil crescent in the east, and then to the south, again, there's the jihadist threat. So it really is a key country. A key country.
There's another player in all of this. There are many other players, but one of them is the former colonial power in Italy. We're talking in Libya, which is Italy. Italy, whose foreign minister is the former leader of the Five Star Movement, Luigi Di Maio, who traveled to Tripoli this week. This is what he had to say when he came back.
Ho fatto presente al presidente Serraj le nostre preoccupazioni sul rischio che le operazioni per liberare Sirte portino a nuovi combattimenti e altre vittime civili. Allo stesso modo, ho fatto presente come sia essenziale evitare il congelamento del conflitto, ipotesi che porterebbe ad una divisione di fatto del paese che per noi sarebbe inaccettabile in quanto anticamera di nuovi conflitti armati.
So which side is Italy on, Michele Barbero?
So Italy tends to be on the side of the UN-backed government, even though in a very Italian way they try to keep a very balanced approach.
It didn't really sound like that, though, in that soundbite we just played, did it?
Yeah, true, but that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's part of the Italian approach, which is also a European approach right now, actually, as well, of not taking sides too openly. But historically, there's no doubt that Italy has been rather on the side of the UN-backed government. What's striking me here is really the how powerless actually European powers are, in the sense that Macron can yell at Turkey as much as he wants, and Di Maio can make as many trips as he can to Libya. But at the end of the day, what's becoming apparent is that, surprise, surprise, who calls the shot? The powers who have boots on the ground and drones and planes in the air. And on top of that, as we just mentioned, different approaches between different European countries. So it's, I think there's been
conspiracy theorists might say, well, follow the money. And in the case of Libya, they're still pumping out oil. There's Total, there's Eni, there are lots of groups there.
But that's why it's so the fact that the EU is so powerless is so dramatic, because the same situation applies to Syria, where basically the big foreign players are, of course, Iran, Turkey again, but and Russia, of course. But Libya, as Catherine was mentioning, it's vital. It's key for European interests on a number of issues, right? So terrorism, immigration, oil, as you mentioned. It's quite problematic, the fact that it's not just on a military level, but also at the end of the day when it comes to diplomatic clout, it's not Western European democracies who call the shots, but it's authoritarian regimes like Russia and Turkey.
And if you're not confused enough as to how many players are involved when it comes to Libya, Christopher Dickey, let's bring in Egypt at this point, because its leader went and inspected troops near the border with Libya over the weekend. And we heard a lot of bellicose rhetoric from Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, himself former head of the army. Again, could this spiral?
I think it's already spiraling. I think what we're seeing here is a couple of proxy wars, Syria and Libya, where the proxy fighters were not able to resolve or win. So what you have in Syria first, with Russia moving in and Iran moving in, was these major powers moving in to back one of the players and playing a decisive role. I mean, the Assad regime has essentially won that war. The only thing that stopped it from taking all of the territory back is Turkish intervention directly. So you've got this escalation from proxies to the direct involvement. Now we're seeing exactly the same thing in Libya. This is, in fact, the dangerous game that Macron was talking about, because we're looking at a situation where we used to have proxies with covert backing from Egypt, UAE, Russia on the Haftar side, up against the government, the Sarraj government, backed by the UN rather ineffectually. Turkey comes in and just blows away the whole question of surrogates and intervenes directly with its own drones and imports troops from Syria. So now, where do you go from there? Egypt, which is on the eastern border of Libya, says, well, if Sirte falls, Sirte, which is sort of sandwiched between Turkish-backed forces now, if it falls, Egypt will intervene directly. So we'll have Egypt up against Turkey. Will Russia then intervene directly? That is the dangerous game that is developing right now in Libya, just as it has developed in Syria.
All right, running short on time, so it's perhaps important to mention before we go that we talked at the outset about when to ease lockdown. Here in France, big symbols this week, the reopening to some visitors of the Eiffel Tower. Catherine Norris-Trent was there on the opening day. They're going to be filtered, not as many as before. You got to book your tickets online. You can't go to the top floor yet. But those who run the Majestic Lady, nonetheless, thrilled.
Today it's like a big party, a wedding party for us, because we prepared for months and months. I decided in 3 hours to close the Eiffel Tower, but to reopen the Eiffel Tower, it was a big challenge.
A big challenge, Catherine Norris-Trent.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's very limited access, as you say. And what I saw yesterday was very much calmer than a usual day at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower. And quite a lot of Parisians really enjoying the calm, saying that without all the tourists, it was actually a pretty unique opportunity to go up the Eiffel Tower and to enjoy it with fewer people around. I mean, the Eiffel Tower is France's most visited monument. It gets nearly 7 million visitors a year, and over 3/4 of those are international tourists. So clearly there are just fewer people coming at the moment. They're also being filtered, as you say, there's no lift, so people can't pack into those. You have to walk up the stairs as far as the second floor. And it's being disinfected. All the public areas are being disinfected every day. And even during the day, there are officials there with swabs going around various places like the binoculars, the viewfinders, taking swabs and seeing if there's any thing they should be alarmed about, and then cleaning everything. So yeah, the Eiffel Tower are taking this very seriously, but I'm really not sure how they're going to be clawing back some of the revenue. 9 million euros a month were lost during those 3 months of lockdown, and the international tourists aren't back yet.
That call, Vivian Walt, for Parisians to take advantage of the absence of those foreign tourists, it's being broadcast very loudly, it seems.
Absolutely. And, you know, the mayor's office, in fact, I went to see the mayor's deputy who handles tourism, and they're thinking about giving away tens of thousands of tickets to the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre Museum, to regular Parisians who, many of whom are stuck here for the summer and who would normally be elsewhere. So they are regarding it as a moment where they can kind of flip tourism on its head. And there've been a lot of years of friction and frustration about over-tourism and giant tour buses and big groups. And this is the summer in which Parisians can maybe go to the Louvre, which they never go to. And as he put it, this is an opportunity of a lifetime, sort of as Catherine said, that you can go to the Louvre and nobody will be there. And trying to persuade Parisians to kind of reclaim their city.
Yeah, go to the Louvre. They're putting the same precautionary measures in place for a bigger reopening on July the 1st, Michele Barbaro, where everyone could see everyone's favorite French painting, the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking forward to it. No, I think I'm going to head to the Louvre, maybe not to the Eiffel Tower if it's true that the lifts are not working, or at least they're not like in operation due to confinement measures, as you guys say. I guess I'm going to wait for the last confinement measures to be lifted.
Chris Ricky, I know you're not afraid to take the stairs at the Eiffel Tower. So let me ask you this question. Will you take advantage of the fact that there are fewer foreign tourists this summer to do something you perhaps wouldn't do at the height of the holiday season, and that is return to Venice? We can show a picture of you enjoying the Acqua Alta in a different season.
Look, I love Venice, but I'm not getting on a plane this summer. I'm going to drive to the south of France later this summer and drive anywhere I need to go in Europe. I'm not going to get on a plane. I don't like planes anyway, but I especially don't like being in a closed container with a lot of people breathing all over each other with or without masks.
Would you tell people, though, this is the summer if they want to go to Venice to do it?
I would say that if you can get into Europe, and that's still a little bit of a question, especially for Americans, this is a good time to visit almost any place in Europe. But I would say first France, first Paris. This city is wonderful right now. There are almost no tourists here. You go up to the Champs-Élysées, everything's open, but there are no tourists. You don't have to fight to get into any of the shops if that's what you want to do. Almost all the monuments are now open. I checked. You can not only can you climb the Eiffel Tower, you can climb the Arc de Triomphe. You can climb to I think you can climb to the top of the Pantheon. Certainly you can get in. So I think Paris is a wonderful city to visit, and a lot of French people who don't visit it should come. Not just the Gilets jaunes, but other people should come too.
All right, climbing stairs, perfect for those who want to shed a few kilos after confinement. Christopher Dickey, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank as well Vivian Walt, Catherine Norris-Trett, Michele Barbaro. Thank you for being with us here in the world this week. There's much more on our website, france24.com, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Bye for now.